Hey guys, my name is Mercedes Lee, and I'm going to be discussing a research project that I did for my lifespan development class. I go to Northeastern State University. We're going to be discussing adolescent eating disorders and the dangers and concerns that the situation faces. Adolescence and middle childhood is a time when generally kids are very happy and very healthy. The immune system is functioning at its highest that it has been functioning at. So illness and sickness really isn't something that's much of a concern. The child normally goes to the doctor, like my son does, probably once a year, twice a year if he's sick. Unfortunately, the problems that start at this age are more behavioral, and so these are the concerns that face them right now. One of the things that I noted in my report is that 60% of American adolescent girls and 30% of boys believe that they're overweight, even though only 15% of girls and 16% of boys are actually overweight. This number is really astounding because that means that 45% of young girls believe that they're overweight and they're not. That's basically half of them believe that they're overweight and they're not. This has a lot to do with the Western society and how we do things over here in Western cultures, and now it's kind of flooding into Eastern cultures. We're seeing a new scene where the slimness is being idolized and stuff like that. We have photoshopping now, so we're at a time when the pictures of the models don't look real. They don't look like themselves. It's not just the fact that they don't like the way they look, it's about the fact that they feel that they're overweight. It's a specific thing concerning the body image and the way that they look and present themselves to society. When adolescents are insecure, they might take steps to feel better about themselves. We all know that peer pressure can be really intense, and they do those things to fit in, and really it's all about fitting in. So if you have half of girls not liking the way they look, it can easily become a trend to not eat and to do things like purging and binging and stuff like that because everybody feels the way that you feel. According to a national U.S. study, 20% of adolescent girls and 10% of adolescent boys in the grades from 9 to 12 engage in some sort of eating disordered behavior. So they're going to do things like fasting for 24 hours, binging and purging, which is where you eat a lot of food and then shortly afterwards you throw it all up. They do have lots of different methods for doing that. There's a situation now that's pretty concerning where you're using laxatives to get rid of the food. So immediately after eating, they're taking laxatives, and then afterwards a lot of laxatives, not just like a couple of laxatives, to the point that dehydration is a serious issue, kidney shutdown, liver failure. There's numerous things that can happen when we're talking about using things to get our body to have a physical reaction. One of the things I want to discuss are the different types of eating disorders that we have. The first one, and unfortunately the one that can do the most damage, that has the highest fatality rate, is going to be anorexia nervosa, which is prolonged self-induced starvation. This can be really damaging for numerous reasons. The people that suffer from anorexia don't see themselves the way that you and I see them. So what they see in the mirror isn't what we see. Even if they see bones or anything like that, in their brain something changes and they still find fat in places that there literally may not be any. They can be on their deathbeds and still refusing food, facing organ failure, kidneys shut down. Eventually the heart will stop functioning. Anorexia is the deadliest disease of all other psychiatric illnesses that there are. It has the highest fatality rate of any of them because of the fact that it's not just about being skinny, it's about a self-image distortion. The other one that I want to discuss is bulimia nervosa, which is where there's binging and purging. This is different from anorexia because with anorexia, they don't necessarily feel bad for the fact that they're not eating. They feel like it's something they have to do. With bulimia, generally after somebody purges, they feel really bad about their choices. They know that what they're doing is wrong. Also, a big distinction that's a difference between anorexia nervosa and bulimia is that with bulimia, people will tend to maintain a somewhat normal body weight because of the fact that they have more regular eating habits than not. Whereas with anorexia, they're going to look thin, with the fact that I think it's 90% of women are the ones with eating disorders. Like 90% of all anorexia nervosa are women. So you're going to see things where they're going to lose their menstruation. And when we're talking about adolescent girls, they never even get the chance to start it. They're starting to freak out over their bodies because their bodies are getting rounder and they're filling out. But this is a time when they're supposed to fill out. This is a time when you're supposed to get rounder. Your body is preparing itself for reproduction and for the womanly figure that you should naturally have to bear children. But in the society that we live in today, when there's so much pressure to look unrealistic, there's all this fantasy imagery of what a body looks like, when none of it is even close to what the natural body should look like, especially during a time when girls and boys are vulnerable to what their body should look like because they're still developing. On the island nation of Fiji, they didn't have any type of TV until 1995. The women there were curvy and natural, and that's what the men liked, and that's what the women felt was beautiful, and they really didn't have any issues with eating disorders on the island at that time. Until TV was introduced in 1995, and the main thing that they got was Western television. After that, they saw a skyrocket in eating disorders and eating distorted habits that began to arise with the women on Fiji. The adolescent young women growing up were idolizing these Western film stars and were starting to pay attention to what they look like and how they were portrayed in the videos and on magazines. And it was just really, it was really astounding to me to think about the fact that they didn't have an issue until our culture was brought to them. A concerning thing with eating disorders is the fact that with eating disorders a lot of the time, there's something called a comorbidity, which is when there's another underlying mental illness that's either presented before or after the diagnosis of the eating disorder. With eating disorders, a lot of the time, we're seeing data that has anxiety as being the highest related comorbidity. So people with eating disorders are more likely to be diagnosed also with anxiety, any kind of anxiety, from agoraphobia to generalized anxiety disorder to social anxiety disorder. And they're seeing also 31.4% of adolescents and children that are diagnosed with the comorbid disorder are also being diagnosed with OCD, ODD, and ADHD. If you don't know those acronyms, that's attention deficit hyperactive disorder. And then we have oppositional defiant disorder as well as obsessive compulsive disorder. They're seeing a lot more of ODD with people with bulimia and a lot of OCD with people with anorexia. Another thing that I want to touch on is the last eating disorder, which is binge eating. We call it BED, which is kind of funny because it's bed, which is kind of all you can do at that point when binge eating disorder gets too far. Binge eating disorder, a lot of people are just thinking is Westerners are overweight, your kid is just a little chubby, your nephew is just cute and round, but really it can be a sign that you don't have proper coping techniques to help you deal with things, and instead you're turning to food to a point that is becoming a problem, to the point where it's becoming you don't know how to handle life if you aren't dealing with it this specific way. Quote that I found in an article that I was reading is that most eating disorder comorbidity studies are done with adults, and there aren't that many done with adolescents and children. And to this day, the fact that it's 2017, that's a little surprising, to say the least, and it's a sad thing mainly due to funding in each state, because how psychiatry works is it varies from state to state to state. So one state can be really ahead of the game and all the new technology and the new knowledge, and the other state is still in the dark ages. They have no idea what's going on. So with that, A lot of studies are being done only with adults, and that's really scary because we don't know how it affects our children. And how it affects an adult is not necessarily the way that it's going to affect a child. We need to know what happens when it starts early on, how it happens, how it's treatable. What are we going to do to prevent this from happening to other children? With eating disorders, you have to remember that things become so serious that sometimes psychiatric hospitalization is needed. 13% of patients that are admitted for eating disorders are adolescents and youth, somewhere between the ages of 9 to 17. This is really startling, but it also says a lot, because we're seeing a trend of higher functioning families that are the ones bringing their kids in for inpatient assessment and treatment. A lot of the things that I'm seeing are where higher functioning families can see the signs. They know what to look for. Lower functioning families may not be as educated, or they may have to work so much that they're not there to see them. You know, you have to think about noticing somebody's eating habits. How are you going to do that if you never are home at dinner? So people that have higher functioning families where there seems to be a more cohesive, active family unit tend to be the ones that are getting admitted for treatment. There's pretty much a consensus on the fact that if we're not educating people, no one's going to know, and the situation isn't going to get better. Funding needs to be had in the places of psychiatry, mental illness, and healthcare in general. But I do agree with almost all the research that I found in the fact that we need to educate parents. We need to educate teachers, because parents are similar to teachers in the fact that they're always there. If a parent isn't there, a teacher is there. So if you're not around your child at lunchtime and then you're not able to necessarily be there at home at night, maybe the teacher sees something, maybe she can let somebody know, and treatment can be getting got for the child while there's still a minor issue and we haven't gotten to a drastic point. Treatment for eating disorders is not that great, even with intervention like inpatient and outpatient therapies, and even with education. Hospitalization still has a high rate of relapse. About half of the people that suffer from an eating disorder will end up in remission, but then half of that group will relapse again, and they'll continue to have a really hard and long journey until they go through recovery. They were doing another study that I came across where they noticed that there's a high risk for people with bulimia to have a low functioning theory of mind, which is where you're able to understand that you have beliefs, dreams, and knowledge of your own, and that somebody else has beliefs, dreams, and knowledge of their own, and that they differ sometimes. Another thing that I want to touch on with the last part of my research is the cognitive impairments that adolescent and children face if they have an eating disorder. A lot of people don't think about the fact that these children and these adolescents with the eating disorder are going to grow into adults, and I don't think anybody is understanding the cognitive impairments that they can face in that. Because of the fact that eating disorders happen with a lot of stressors, it can be used as a coping technique. If the children start not being able to learn how to cope, it can affect how they have relationships down the line. There was a study that I was reading in here that talks about maladaptive coping strategies in the development in adolescence, which can go on to affect them as adults in workplace environments and in their personal relationships. This creates the cycle of where they have a long recovery ahead. Eating disorders are really unfortunate, whether it is binge eating, which is just as serious with even less research on it, or as serious as anorexia, which is just painful and really sad to watch. I think it's a lot to do with the culture. I've battled with my weight. My whole family has battled with their weight. And it's mainly because of what we hear and what we believe is beautiful and how we handle our stresses, and if we're able to high functioning, low functioning family. But I think one thing that we can agree on is that there needs to be more research done, there needs to be more studies done, and the people responsible for the children and the youth coming up need to be properly educated so that we have a fighting chance at controlling this. This was the majority of the research that I did. Thank you for watching.